This Thursday, February 2nd at 6 p.m., the Manitoba Conservatory of Music and Arts will be starting a brand new 4-week course that will explore the many facets of the African American spiritual. One of the singular expressions of hope, joy, despair, and faith, the African American spiritual has established itself as one of the main elements of North American folk song, and it is a huge part of Americana. From the plantation to the sharecropper to the civil rights movement of the 60s, and even today, the spiritual is the biggest mountain on the American folk music landscape. Teaching this fascinating class at the MCMA will be jazz vocalist Adele Wilding. Wilding is the inaugural winner of the 2005 BWA Nina Simone Award in London, England, and she has performed at jazz festivals and taught jazz workshops throughout Canada and the UK, and has toured Western Canada no less than 4 times, appearing with several of the region's finest jazz, blues, gospel, and soul artists. And joining me here over Zoom to talk about this really interesting course at the Manitoba Conservatory of Music and Arts, I am joined by Adele Wilding. Hi, Adele. Nice to meet you here over Zoom.
Hello, Chris. It's nice to meet you as well.
So the course at the conservatory sounds really interesting. What made you want to teach a class that focuses on the African American spiritual?
Well, Chris, I've been active as a jazz performer, /composer, /songwriter, and music educator for over 20 years now. And I actually got some of my inspiration from a fellow jazz vocalist out in Vancouver, who, during the great pivot of the last 3 years, decided that she wanted to try something new and pivoted into a more blues and roots genre. And that got me thinking, I've been performing jazz all this time, and jazz has become this hugely popular genre now. I would really like to tap into the roots of jazz, and I literally wanted to go into the roots of it. And that's what gave me the idea to start delving more into the African American spiritual, both as a performer and a music educator. So when I was asked to offer courses through the Music Equals programming at the Manitoba Conservatory of Music and Arts, my coordinator, Dominique Billingshurst, said, well, she asked me, do you have any ideas for courses? And the African American spiritual just literally popped into my head.
And it's
history.
Yeah, it's such an integral part of jazz music, right?
Absolutely.
The spiritual.
Certainly is, Chris.
Yeah. When many of us think of the spiritual, we very often think of the slave working in the field on southern plantations, but it is so much more than that, right? Like, can you talk about the importance of the spiritual? Like, for example, in my research, I was doing some reading that the spiritual could be used as code for the Underground Railroad. Can you talk to that a little bit?
Yes, of course. Just to delve briefly into the history. The slaves that were brought over, the enslaved, I refer to them, brought over to the Americas, were literally stripped of their cultures. So they weren't allowed to communicate in their languages, for instance, and the languages were predominantly those from West Africa. So quite often, too, when you talk about the despair and the hope of spirituals, there is that other side, too. Quite often they would use code if they wanted to imitate their slaveholders. They would also use code to plan their escape. And of course, the promised land back then was the northern United States and, of course, our country, Canada. So there are songs that depict this in code. For instance, Follow the Drinking Gourd, which is one of my favorite code songs, refers to the Big Dipper, and that's the drinking gourd because it's sitting in the north. And of course, that paved the various paths and the routes and the safe houses that protected the escaped and enslaved on their way to the promised land. Of course, as I mentioned, the promised land being the northern United States and Canada. So that is a perfect example of a code song. It's one of my favorites, and it's actually in my repertoire too. And one other example I'd like to make would be Go Down Moses. There's the famous individual who's now a legend, in African American folklore, and that would be Harriet Tubman. And Harriet Tubman was responsible for making multiple trips from the north down to the southern United States to help other enslaved people to escape to freedom. And she was often referred to as Moses as well, too, because of the work and her tenacity and her commitment to helping the escaped slaves reach a better life.
Absolutely. So the course starts on Thursday. What can people expect over the 4 weeks?
Well, every week we talk about something different. We explore a different topic. So the first week is looking at the historical, cultural, and social context of the early African American spiritual. And we also look at early forms of spiritual songs as well. Then in week 2, we discuss the impact that the African American spiritual has had on popular music of the Western world. So that's a lot of the popular genres that you and I and other people in the Western Hemisphere can identify with throughout the decades. Week 3, we explore how the spiritual impacted the civil rights movement in the United States. And we also cross over to gospel songs that week. And then finally, week 4, I beg your pardon, concludes with listening to musical excerpts by contemporary artists who perform spirituals or they write their own songs in the spiritual genre. And of course, that will also include a crossover into gospel songs as well.
You touched on it a little bit earlier. You're going to be focusing on specific songs. Can you talk about that bit? Like, it's not only just going to be spirituals pre-Civil War, right? It's going to be spirituals afterwards as well, right?
That's correct. I'm going to be looking at how spirituals actually influenced the great folk singer-songwriters of the United States in the 1960s, like the Pete Seegers and the Joan Baez's, and how spirituals informed them trying to get the message across too during the civil rights movement. So we'll be looking at their songs. And as I mentioned previously, we'll be listening to modern day songs that were written with spirituals integrity and or gospel songs, because gospel music really is the modern day equivalent of the early spirituals.
Right. There's also this broader conversation about how the spiritual has made its way into contemporary music. Without giving too much away, can you talk about some of the points that you're going to be making throughout the course?
I'm just thinking probably, I think some of the points that I'm going to be making is how everything relates to the spirituals. Like in the beginning, there were spirituals when you're talking about the popular song, and certainly songs that have entered the vernacular. And I think one of the most interesting points about this course is looking at the way it gradually shaped the music from blues to early forms of jazz to early country music. And of course, the 1950s rock and roll as coined by Alan Freed back in that time, and how that helped to break down some of the social and racial barriers that existed in that time.
It just sounds like such a great course. It happens over 4 Thursdays, starting this Thursday. How much is it, and where can people go to register for it?
Well, Chris, the course is $80 for the full 4 weeks, which I think is a steal. And to register for it, you simply Google the Manitoba Conservatory of Music and Arts, or if you know the website address, even better. So go on to their website, and on their homepage, you scroll down to adult programs. You click on adult programs, and you'll see my photo, my headshot, and a link underneath, and you click on the link. And I would like to emphasize that this is strictly a virtual offering. It's not an in-person. So when you register, you will be exploring the course virtually online.
So you can see it from the comfort of your own living room, as it were.
Yes, and it's very interactive. It's not just me lecturing about this topic. I have points within the course where I invite the course participants to engage in a question and answer session with me. And also they get to listen to some really great excerpts of music, and they're able to comment on those excerpts as well.
Oh, it sounds great. It sounds so interesting, Adele. Thanks for taking the time to talk with me today. For our Classic 107 listeners, I have embedded a direct link to the registration page for the course, African American Spirituals, that you can find in the article that is now up on Classic 107. Adele, thanks again.
Thank you, Chris. If I could just add one footnote before we sign off. If they take the course in February and they enjoy this music appreciation course and they want something more hands-on, I'm offering a 3-part African American Spirituals workshop in March, which starts March 9th and runs every Thursday until the 23rd.
Oh, it sounds fantastic. Oh, excellent. Okay, I'll put that up as well. Adele, thanks again.
Thank you, Chris. It's been a pleasure.